so today we're going to talk about intelligence. What is it?
Understanding.
Intelligence is understanding, okay. Anything else?
Solving problems.
Solving problems. In order to solve a problem, you have to have some understanding. Other things?
Abilities.
Abilities. Analytical skills. So if you look on the web, I love Google Define. Just Google, put define and then intelligence, and it comes up with, it's the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. So whoever said understanding, that's sort of what understanding is, right? You have some knowledge, and you understand how to work with that knowledge, right? So you can apply it. DictionaryReference.com says it's a capacity for learning, reasoning, understanding, and similar forms of mental activity, aptitude, and grasp of truths, relationships, facts, meanings, etc. Wikipedia says intelligence has been defined in different ways, including the abilities for abstract thought, understanding, communication, reasoning, learning, planning, and problem solving. So Wikipedia's definition, I like it because it suggests some ambiguity. Like intelligence, just like a lot of other things, we sort of have an intuitive understanding of what it is, but it's really, really hard to define it. So lots of people have different definitions of what intelligence actually is. If you look across all of these definitions, though, something that seems to be consistent has to do with acquiring and using, right? Learning. That's acquiring knowledge, or acquiring information. Reasoning has to do with using the knowledge. Abstract thought, that's reasoning and using information that you have, understanding, acquiring, reasoning, right? So all of these definitions have to do something with acquiring and using information. So this brings up an interesting, philosophical question. What things are intelligent? Is this intelligent? You all have these computers, right? Are they intelligent? This is it says a star board, but they're also called smart boards. It's an intelligent board. Are computers smart? Do they have intelligence? Huh? Why? Why would you say that they're smart?
They make use of the data to give you results.
So they take data, they can acquire information, right? You type on the keyboard, and it acquires information, and then based on the information, it will use it, right? A great example of this is a video game. You press the B button, the thing jumps, or whatever, right? So it acquires information, and then it uses that information. But what are some of the other aspects of understanding that are in these definitions that we might question about a computer?
Actually, a computer, if you play chess, I guess, can beat you.
Yeah, so the computer, they must be really smart, right? Because chess is hard. You have to be smart to play chess well, so the computers must be really smart.
But you can't
They
think
have
abstractly.
They can't think abstractly, what?
Or they can learn.
They can't learn? But every time I download a file, it gains more information, right?
You can add something.
But I got files all the time.
It can develop itself.
It can't develop itself, so it requires input from the outside, right? But don't we require input from the outside as well? I mean, you're in my class, right? You're the computer here, and I am the person clicking on your keyboard, which are your, the hair cells in your ear, right? I'm giving you input. But what do you do with that a computer doesn't do? Or that most traditional computers don't do. That people are actually working on developing artificial intelligence so that computers can do some more of the things that we might say computers don't have. Do they really understand? Like when I type in Google intelligence, does it really understand what intelligence is? Or is it just saying, aha, this is what other people have said, this is what I'm putting up? Blindly, without understanding. Yeah, a lot of people would argue that. So, maybe at some point computers, maybe even right now, I'm not a computer scientist, so I don't know about the current AI research, but intelligence is something that people are struggling with. So how do you measure intelligence?
IQ.
You could use IQ. What does IQ stand for?
Intelligence quotient.
It's an intelligence quotient. This is actually a more complicated way that people use to measure intelligence than some of the earlier ways to measure intelligence. So what was like the earliest way to measure intelligence? Before I got my PhD, I got my MA. Actually, I got an MS, but MA is close enough. MA stands for mental age. Yes, mental age. So people would measure intelligence using mental age. What's mental age?
MA stands for mental age.
Well, in the context of this lecture, MA stands for mental age. In terms of the degree, it's Masters of Arts. Sorry. So, mental age. How does mental age measure intelligence? How do you measure mental age?
You see the kind of skills and knowledge and how people think, and you compare it to the average of that age. For example, if a 4-year-old boy has the abilities and the skills, the mental skills of an average 9-year-old, then he is 9 years old in terms of mental age.
So you could look at people of different ages and give them tests and see how well they could do on different tests, right? Like you give a baby a calculus test, they're going to fail. But if you give it a test like put something in front of their face and see if they can do that, after they develop enough, they'll be able to grasp it, right? So you can give people of different ages different tests and see how people do on average on those tests, right? Then you have someone new and you want to know like what age they're performing like. So you give them the same tests and see how their results are compared to the different mental ages and say, aha, they perform most like the 9-year-olds. So they have a mental age of 9. At my former university, I haven't heard so many people talking about this at this university. Probably plenty of people are talking about this, but it's in Turkish probably, so I don't understand as well. But I used to hear women complaining about the men that would go to that school. And they would talk about like who they liked, who they wanted to date. Sorry about being heteronormative here. But they would say things like, oh man, all of the men here, they act like what? What do the men act like? They're college-age men, so they're like 18 to 21, roughly. Maybe some 17-year-olds and some older ones too. But how do they act? They act like they're 13. Oh man, the men at this university suck. They all act like they're 13. Right? But the men, they would say the same thing about the women. Like, oh, and she had to go and tell all her friends about this. Like she can't be an adult and just keep it between us, right? She's acting like she's 12. So people use this in common usage lots of times. So mental age is just the age at which someone performs intellectually. It's just an early measure. And you hear people say things like, oh, he has a mind of an 8-year-old. This could be good or bad, depending on who you're talking about. So, my oldest son, people say things, well, they haven't said so much like this before, but earlier, like I'm a college professor, so I would use big words around my kid. So then he would use big words when he was talking to other people, and they'd be like, whoa, he talks like he's 12. So, you measure mental age exactly the way that he indicated. So you measure groups of people at different ages. You find out what each age group can do on average. Then you find out what the individual you're interested in can do. And then you assign them the mental age according to their abilities. What's a benefit of using mental age as a measure of intelligence? Are there any benefits of this? Okay, no benefits. What are some negative things about using mental age? What's the benefit?
okay, if you have someone who's like, I know that a boy in Egypt,
Okay?
he's in middle school, or actually in grade 7 now.
Okay?
Okay, but he goes to the American University in Cairo. He's doing like something related to computer. So because he has this mental age of, I don't know, 20, let's say 20. So he could benefit from this and get a college degree at the same time.
So if we know that someone has a mental age of 20, then we could say that this person is prepared for college, right? So colleges could use this. And they could forget about asking people what their actual age is. They could just give people tests and see, do you perform like an 18 to older adult, right? And if you do, we'll take you even if you're 11 and in 7th grade, right? So that's a benefit. It communicates some useful information. Also, it's really easy to measure. This is so simple. And it provides a good description of abilities. What are some negatives about using mental age, though?
I think it cannot be used for adults.
It can't be used for adults. Why not?
Because age doesn't have to do with the head.
Age doesn't what?
I don't think variability in age has anything to do with adults.
Variability in age doesn't have anything to do with adults' intelligence, are you saying?
Yes.
Does anyone understand what he's saying? I think I have an inkling, but...
I think he means like maybe until, let's say, 25 or 40 or something, you can develop your intelligence, but after that, maybe you have the same.
So earlier when we were talking about children and brain development, I said that the brain basically develops and grows and gets more myelinated until age 25. And after that, you know, like that's as good as you're going to get. So really, the difference between someone who's like 25 and someone who's 35 is not that big of a deal, right? You see a 35-year-old person marry a 25-year-old person and you think, wow, they're a little bit younger. Or maybe, wow, they're really a lot younger. But what if you took someone who was 20 and they married a 10-year-old? Is there a difference between how you would look at someone who's 20 marrying a 10-year-old versus a 35-year-old marrying a 25-year-old?
But that's because now we're only looking at marriage, and marriage is something else. If we were looking at other thing, maybe...
Okay, so forget about marriage. Forget about marriage. I'm going to pick a friend. I need a friend. So, I pick a friend. You're going to be my friend. How old are you?
19.
He's 19. I'm 35. Is that odd for a 35-year-old to have a 19-year-old friend? Maybe. I would say that's a little odd. But certainly, especially with teachers and students, like they work together and they get to know each other and they form friendships and mentoring relationships. So maybe not super odd. How about if I just pick some random 7-year-old kid off the street? Like, he's going to be my friend. This is different than like volunteering my time to help an orphan who maybe doesn't have a family and expose them to the things that they otherwise wouldn't be exposed to. This is my friend. This is someone I'm going to buy them a cell phone and I'm going to call them when I have problems. Right? It's weird. Why? Well, because the mental age differences between the people that are older, like a 10-year difference when you're talking about 30-year-olds, isn't much. But a 10-year-old difference when you're talking about 10-year-olds is huge. So, some of the cons. Let me do the second one. The mental age thing only works reasonably well with children. So you have big differences in mental age between someone who's 2 and 4. But if I say like someone has a mental age of 35, does that tell you something a lot different than if I said 37? No, it doesn't. 2 and 4, big difference. 35, 37, not a huge difference. Mental age alone also provides an ambiguous picture of intelligence. So behind this board, I have someone, and they're actually sitting up on something so you can't see their legs right now. They'll come out in a moment. They have a mental age of 12. What do you know about this person? How intelligent are they? I mean, they have the abilities of a 12-year-old. You know that, right? Are they above average or below average intelligence? Or are they, you know, right at average?
Depends how old they are, actually.
That's exactly right. It depends how old they are. So if we have a 3-year-old behind there, they're brilliant. If we have my 35-year-old colleague, this is depressing, right? If they're 12 years old, then they're average. So this information by itself, it doesn't communicate a lot about how they are compared to their peers. So we need some measure without this ambiguity. So the first measure to do this was the original intelligence quotient developed by Binet and later modified by Stanford. So what is the intelligence quotient? How does it measure intelligence? A quotient? What is a quotient in math? I'm going to write on the board today. What's a quotient?
Oh, it's like, okay, 1 over 3, and then you have 3 over.
This is a quotient. 1 over 3, 2 over 5, 27 over 2. You're basically taking one thing and dividing it by something else. That's a quotient, right? So what do we use in our quotient for the Stanford-Binet IQ? What's in our numerator? What's in our denominator? Has something to do with age. So someone said age. What type of age? There are different types of age, right? We've talked about mental age. What other types of age are there? Chronological age. There's also, like, if you want to talk about, like, build, how big people are, like a physical age, right? So the ones that we're using, what are we using here? We're using mental age and chronological age. Good. Where did they go?
We divide mental age divided by the chronological age.
Mental age divided by chronological age. Is that right? Yeah? So we divide mental age by chronological age, ding, 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 and we multiply it by 100. Why do we multiply it by 100? Does anyone know?
Because we are trying to increase them based on 100.
Yeah, someone said 100 is a nice round number. We're going to create IQs where the average is 100. They didn't have to. If they didn't multiply it by 100, then the average person would have an IQ of what? 1, exactly. So they just picked 100 to make it. I don't know. Alright, so if Jim was 4, it's his chronological age, but his mental age was 8, right? So we have 8 divided by 4, which is 2 times 100 is 200, right? So he would have an IQ of 200. So what type of an IQ would this be? Is this a high IQ, a sort of average IQ, or what? Yeah, this would be a really high IQ. Someone with a 200 IQ, holy crud. If he was 16, so you would have 8 divided by 16, that would be 0.5 or 1/2 times 100, so it'd be 50, right? You'd have an IQ of 50. So this gets rid of the earlier ambiguity. If I tell you that the person behind the board has an IQ of 50, then what do you know?
It's below average.
They're below average, so I'll show you who it is. Oh crap, it must have ran away. So yeah, if I tell you the IQ was 50, or I say she has an IQ of 135, you immediately know something about her. You know that her IQ is higher than the average. Does that make sense? But this measure also has some problems with it. It's problematic because it's based on mental age, right? So this means that intelligence is going to drop as you get older. So if you think that, like, okay, 25, you're as good as you're going to get, and over time you break down, but this breakdown isn't really quick, right? You know, 25 versus a 26-year-old, they're about the same. Versus a 35-year-old, pretty much the same, right? But this means that even though my mental age would stay basically the same, as my chronological age gets bigger and bigger, what happens? So my mental age is constant, but my chronological age is getting bigger. This is a limit problem for those of you who have done this. What's the limit? As chronological age tends to infinity, the limit is, anyone know? Zero! Yeah, this means the older I get, the less smart I would be measured as. Does that make sense? Because my mental age is staying constant, but my chronological age is actually increasing. So by dividing this, which stays the same, by a bigger thing, the overall result is smaller.
The mental age, it does not increase. It doesn't get less.
Well, so we said, like, you know, what's the difference between a 35 and a 37-year-old in mental age? Like, there's really not much of a difference, right? So, how old is someone? Okay, we'll just pick 40. How do you tell the difference between a 40-year-old and a 35-year-old, right? So, like, the mental age is really only this useful idea when you're talking about kids, or mental ages of kids. Because mental age differences in older adults aren't really that meaningful.
So suppose we have a 60-year-old guy, but he's good.
Yeah.
So how can we measure?
So if the 65-year-old guy has eaten well and exercised and is doing things intellectually active, then he should measure just like a 35-year-old on an intelligence test, right? You should perform basically the same. Does that make sense? I mean, as people get older, some neurons start to die and deficits accumulate over time. If you're unlucky, maybe you develop something like Alzheimer's, where your chronological age can start decreasing much more rapidly. But as long as you're experiencing aging healthily, then you're really not going to have much change in chronological age. Another thing that's a problem is this doesn't account for variability in chronological age. So if you take a 2-year-old kid, like some 2-year-old kids can do a lot of stuff, and other 2-year-old kids really can't do a whole lot of stuff. So this means that there's a huge amount of variability in what 2-year-old kids can do, right? So a 2-year-old kid that measures like a 4-year-old, you would say this person has an IQ of 200, right? Which would suggest that they're really, really brilliant, when actually a lot of 2-year-old kids are performing that well. Does that make sense? So we need some way to account for the variability. So the modern IQ measures do this. So with the modern IQ measures, what we do is we get the mean ability for different ages. This is exactly what we were doing in the last example, and exactly what we did when we were measuring mental ability alone. Okay, so you're how old? You take the test. You're how old? You take the test. We get lots of people with lots of different ages that take the tests. Then we measure how well, on average, people of the different ages do. Now, not do we only get the mean, but we also get the variance. Remember when I talked about the variance? And the variance is basically how spread out things are. So, some groups are going to have a lot of variance. Some groups are going to have less variance. So we're going to take into account this variance. We're going to get the person's ability and age. We're going to we're going to compare that person's ability against the mean and variance of others that are the same age. So you said you were 19? So he's 19. I get his ability. I compare it to the average ability of 19-year-olds, right? Now this will tell me whether he's above, below, or right at. But this, again, doesn't really tell me a lot, because if I say that, okay, he's 10 above, well, if you have lots and lots of people who are 50 above, this 10 above isn't really that different. But if instead most people are only like 1 or 2 above or below, then that 10 above is a lot. Does this make sense? Because I want you guys to get it. And it's hard to tell because you guys aren't nodding very much.
But why should others have like 50, like a lot of others have 50? Because now we're measuring the average.
Yes, so we have the average.
So if we say that the average is, let's say 90, I don't know, 100, okay? Now, a lot of people would be like close to 100, maybe 110, 90, 105. So there would not be a lot of people 150 within that.
Well, but it depends on the test. So different semesters, I give exactly the same test, and I get different results. So I may have the exact same mean, but I might have a greater spread out. So it tells me something different about the place that I'm giving the test, right? So imagine that I give a test and the average is 100. This isn't like 100 is a perfect score. Let's say 100 is like half, like the maximum score is 200. So the average is 100. Now, if most of the people are getting close to 100, then maybe we would have almost everybody between the range of 90 and 110, right? So in this situation, if I said that you got 105, what would that suggest about you compared to if I said you got 120? If you got 105, that basically puts you right in the middle of everyone else, right? Not exactly in the middle, you're a little above average, but you're still within that group where most people are, right? But if you're out here, then that suggests that you are very different from, not the mean, but like from the rest of your peers. Does that help make more sense? All right, in statistics we call this getting someone's z-score. In stats, if I teach it next year, then we'll talk more about z-scores. Okay, so in the modern IQ measures, we set the mean to 100 and the standard deviation to 15, so it corresponds with the earlier measures for the people who set it up as 100 for whatever reason that they did. Okay, so what is normal? Well, using this, if we say normal is the mean score, is the average score, what's the normal score? 100, right? So the average score, or the mean score, is 100. But is 100 what most people actually get? Most people actually don't get 100, right? So here's 100, this many people got 100, but this many people got 101, and this many people got 99. So this means that more people got 101 and 99 than got 100. Does that make sense? What this means is that if we just say 100 is normal, we're missing out on all of this variability. Because it's really not that atypical for someone to have an IQ of 101 or 99 or even 105 or 95, right? So we have this normally shaped distribution. This is the percent of people that get a particular IQ score, and these are the IQ scores here. Most of the people, as you can see, are fairly close to 100. So this is 85 and this is 105. I'm sorry, 85 and 115. That's one standard deviation away. So one standard deviation away, we have 68% of the people. Well, 68% of the people, that's more than a majority, right? So to have an IQ within this range is fairly normal. Make sense? As we go out farther, we have more and more people, and meaning that fewer and fewer people have IQs that are more and more extreme. If we want to talk about statistical significance, what level would we look for? P is less than 0.05. That's right. So we would want to look for the top 2.5% and the bottom 2.5%, right? But actually there are some differences that come into play earlier than that that are meaningful. Yeah?
So you said 68%
Mm-hmm.
between this. But actually we're not measuring kids. Because most people who take the IQ here are like, you know, adults or young adults or young boys. But not kids like.
So I'm not positive about the shape of the IQ distribution for children, but even with the children, you still have these same break-off scores, where 100 is the mean for kids. And that 80 is quite a bit below the mean. And if you get down to about 70, the American Psychological Association considers that clinically retarded, and that would apply to someone who's 4 or someone that's 40. So gifted, different people define gifted as different things, but up here around 2 standard deviations beyond the mean. So it's like the top 5% of people, which is fairly closely related to the statistical significance. All right, so anyway, normal is sort of definitionally dependent, right? Normal doesn't mean necessarily the mean score. Doesn't mean 100. Doesn't mean if you have an IQ of 98 that you are abnormal. It doesn't mean that if you have an IQ score of 110 that you're a freaking genius, right? Because a lot of people have IQ scores of 110 and beyond. Okay, so intelligence, we said, it's the ability to acquire and use information, and this is a pretty general definition. Spearman thought about intelligence in a little different way. So he came up with the 2-factor theory of intelligence. So what were his 2 factors? G, which stood for general, so a general intelligence, and S, specific intelligences. So what's a general intelligence? Your ability to acquire and use information generally, yeah. So my ability to acquire and use mathematical information, language information, spatial information. Wow, I can use the spatial information. Sailing pool troop can use spatial information really well. Right? So general encompasses a lot of different abilities to acquire and use information. How about the S, the specific? It's your ability to acquire and use specific types of information. Yes, perfect, thank you. So we have this general intelligence, G, which is broad and encompasses a lot of different things, and these more specific intelligences related to specific areas. Your ability to, create music, your ability to think abstractly, your ability to relate to someone else, right? So Spearman thought that the skill level, the individual S's, the specifics, were dependent on G. So there's this correlation between the two, which means that someone with a higher G will also have, on average, higher S's. Does that make sense? Okay, so when most people talk about intelligence, they're usually referring to something like Spearmans G. So they say like, oh man, she's really smart. Why do you say they're really smart? She got an A in physics, and she's head of the student union, and she, she's a good friend, she understands, lots of general things. So what's some evidence for G? Well, lots of people with high IQs are good at lots of different stuff. You have people who can play the violin and write a good story and talk with other people, but you also have people like savants. So what's a savant? Any of you guys seen Rain Man? Hot water burn baby. Rain Man. So who is Rain Man? Actually, not who is Rain Man. Who was the person who talked about Rain Man? He was a savant, right? How did he behave? Abnormally. How so?
He's like dumb, but
He's dumb. He had a low intelligence, is what she was saying, right? What do you mean he's dumb? Okay, how much are you going to pay for this, I forget what he wanted to buy, candy bar or something. How much is a candy bar? $2. I can't do it. $2. How much is this brand new car? $2. Something like that, right? Dude, are you stupid? You have a low IQ or what? It's whatever time. have to watch Jeopardy or Wapner or whatever the show he was, right? So he looks really dumb for a lot of things, and not only is he bad with guessing how much something costs, he's also bad with relating to people. So his brother comes up and he's like, dude, give me a hug, because his brother wants his money. Give me a hug. And the guy freaks out. Ugh. Right? Suggesting that his interpersonal abilities are compromised. But what does he do that's unbelievably incredible? Yeah.
Memorize the old student.
Yeah, he like reads a book and he memorizes everything. He's in a doctor's office. Oh, that wall has 387 tiles on it. He's like really good with numbers and memory and stuff. So they go to Las Vegas and they gamble. Because his brother teaches him how to count cards. Because if you can count cards, you can win a lot of money in blackjack. So he has this incredible, specific thing, right? Which would suggest that also G should be somewhat good, if G is strongly correlated with the S. But oftentimes it's not. They have something that they're really, really good at. So Stephen Wiltshire, if you Google him, you can find some YouTube videos where he goes up in a helicopter, looks at a city for an hour, and then comes down and spends the next week drawing out the city. And draws it with unbelievable amounts of detail. Very precise. I'm not going to say he gets everything right, because I don't think that would be possible. I haven't measured, maybe he does. I would guess that he doesn't get everything right, but he's able to get a heck of a lot more information than I ever could. Alright, so maybe G is wrong. Let's go back to our definition. The ability to acquire and use information. The definition of aptitude is a natural ability to do something. This is a lot like our definition up here, but applied to a specific area. And there's this theory of multiple intelligence by Gardner, and says that people have different abilities to acquire and use different types of information. So maybe there's not this G, but instead there's lots of S's, but no underlying G. Does that make sense? So Gardner also suggests that one type of ability is not necessarily better than another. Lots of societies put values on particular types of abilities more than others. So what types of abilities do societies really, really value? Logic. What do parents encourage their children to study hard? Did you guys, parents, encourage you to study? Did they encourage you to study everything equally hard? Make sure you study these cartoons really hard. No, they want you to study mathematics, science. Forget about the literature. Oh, that's floofy crap. We don't need that. Oh, you don't need to study psychology. This is just a bunch of floofy garbage about how to deal with people. Right? You need to study the math and the science so you can be a CEO and make a ton of money, or so you can be a doctor and make a ton of money, or so you can do something else and make a ton of money, right? So lots of societies value some abilities more than another, but Gardner argues that one type of ability isn't necessarily better than something else. So we have logical mathematical intelligences that people like programmers and lawyers should have a lot of. Visual spatial intelligence that people like designers and mechanics who need to understand how things fit together should have a lot of. Verbal linguistic intelligence that writers, talk show hosts, and hopefully some teachers should have a lot of. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence that dancers should have, but teachers maybe not so much. Musical rhythmic intelligence, composers, rappers. You know, my name is Dr. Knapp, and I'm okay. I teach about psychology almost every day. If you come to my class and pay attention, you're gonna get an A and you won't have to mention. All right. Interpersonal intelligences. Intelligence to interact with someone else in an empathetic way. Politicians should have this. Salespeople should have this. If you are good at getting people to trust you, you're going to be able to sell them things much more easily than if people are like, dude, he kind of freaks me out. I don't think he's being honest here. Intrapersonal skills or intelligence. Basically your ability to understand internal states that you have. Philosophers, counselors should have this. Naturalistic skills that farmers and survivalists should have. Existential intelligence, I can't say anymore. That people like philosophers and moms and teachers should have. You know, there's some really intelligent in the classically defined sense people that say some really stupid things. Do you guys know who James Watson is? A Nobel Prize winner. He must be smart, right? The halo effect? Nobel Prize winner? He's got to be smart. So, James Watson, what did he win the Nobel Prize for? You want to know? Biology? Genetics? Figured out that DNA has this double helical structure. He wasn't the only one. He worked with Francis Crick, I believe, to get the Nobel Prize. Anyway, he said that all our social policies are based on the fact that their, meaning the Africans' intelligence is the same as ours. Whereas all the testing says not really. This was just like 5 years ago that he said this. So basically he's saying that Africans are dumb. We have 2 Africans in here. Sorry guys. Watson says you're dumb. Watson, he won the Nobel Prize, so he must be right. Right?
No.
No? You're not dumb? What do you mean you're not dumb? Watson says you're dumb. This sounds really racist, right? So does he have any evidence to back this up? Right? A good scientist, they're not just going to say something. They're going to have evidence to back it up. Is there evidence that would suggest that Africans are dumb? You're shaking your head. No, you're an African. You don't want to admit it. Actually, there is. There's lots. There's lots of evidence that Africans are dumb. Interestingly, individuals from cultures outside of the culture that develops intelligence tests tend to perform not so well. So you have white Americans from white American culture developing these intelligence tests. And then you give them to people from a different culture. How are they going to do? Well, it depends on how good of an intelligence test you really have. If there is bias in your test towards a specific culture, then you're going to have biased results. So I would argue that there is plenty evidence, but that the evidence that there is biased. So there's a difference between intelligence versus achievement. Intelligence, again, the ability to acquire and use information, whereas achievement is a process or a fact of achieving something. So in order to achieve, you have to have some ability. Right? In order to do well on one of my tests, you have to have some ability in order to do better than chance on average. However, lots of achievement tests are necessarily biased. So the tests that I give you guys, the quizzes, my tests, they're biased. They're hugely biased. Who are they biased towards? Who should do well on my tests? Americans, I would argue, should theoretically be able to do better on my tests. Why? Language, because they're native English speakers. For so many of you who are not native English speakers, you have this barrier to overcome to take my tests. Does that make sense? So my tests are biased to people who speak English well, who are fluent. My test is also biased to which major? Psychology majors, people who are studying psychology, right? So my tests are biased. But they're still based on experience, right? The more psychology classes you've taken, the better you should do on my test. Some of the IQ tests I've taken have questions like, what's the capital of Greece? Growing up in America, we talked a lot about Greece and Rome and London. And London's not a country, but we talked about a lot of particular European countries, right? So I had no problem saying Athens. If they said, what's the capital of Kenya? I don't know. Wasn't taught that in school, right? That's an achievement. different type of question, something that's not related to your intelligence, but is based on the things that you have already been taught. Here's another test question that I had. So, which of these things is not like the other? So there's a shark, there's a dog, there's a pelican, and an octopus. Which one is not like the other? The dog is not like the other. Why? Well, the other ones can all live in water. But you know what I thought when I took this test? Dogs like to play in the water. Guess which one I picked? I may have overthought this. I picked the octopus.
Why?
Why would I pick the octopus? I had a lot of biology courses. Something they talk a lot about in biology, if you're talking about evolution, they talk about vertebrates versus invertebrates. And I said, this is the only thing that doesn't have a backbone, right? I don't know if that's the right answer or not. I have no idea. But based on the things that I have learned recently, that affected the answer that I chose. Simmons rap test. Let's see if any of you guys can get this. Don't play the dozens. What does this mean? So, people from inner city communities, specifically black inner city communities in America, should be able to answer this without a problem. I didn't grow up in an African American inner city community. I know the answer. This is actually because I looked it up online. The dozens. It's don't talk about others' family members. Have you guys heard people say things like, your mama's so fat that, you know, something like that? That's playing the dozens. So if there's a question like this, I would fail miserably. I would look like an idiot. So to the extent that an intelligence test measures achievement, it's invalid. And this is a huge problem for test designers, and that's why you see intelligence test questions like this. Things that aren't culturally biased. But actually, this can sort of be culturally biased too. Because if your parents know that intelligence tests asks questions like this, what can they do? They can get a whole bunch of books with questions like this, so you get practice looking for patterns. Right? So even this can measure achievement to some extent. We will finish talking about malleable intelligence next time and get into racism.